I turned 69 on a hot July afternoon in Houston. The cicadas outside the window screamed like they were singing only for me. But inside my house it was quiet. Too quiet. Birthdays didn't mean much anymore. My wife had been gone 6 years, and my children hadn't celebrated with me in almost as long. So when the delivery truck stopped in front of my house and the driver carried a carefully wrapped package to my porch, I felt something stir inside me. The box was narrow, tall, and heavier than I expected when I bent down to pick it up. On the outside, there was no return address, just my name, printed in black marker. I brought it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and sliced the tape open with my pocket knife. Inside, cushioned by layers of brown paper, lay a bottle of tequila. Not the kind you find on the shelf at a corner store. This was rare, aged, imported. The glass gleaming with gold liquid that seemed to catch the light of the room. Taped to the neck of the bottle was a small folded card. My fingers trembled when I opened it. "Happy birthday, Dad." 3 words. No signature. But I didn't need one. I would have known that handwriting anywhere. The sharp strokes. The way the letters leaned forward like they were impatient to get to the end. That was my son Daniel. I hadn't heard from him in 4 years. Not a call. Not a letter. Not even a message through someone else. After his mother's death, everything between us unraveled. Head accused me of hiding money that should have been his. Said I always held him back. Treated him like a failure. The last words Head spoken to me in person were, "You're dead to me." And yet here it was a gift on my birthday. For a moment, I almost let myself believe this was his olive branch. His way of saying, maybe we could start over. But the longer I looked at the bottle, the less comfort I felt. Something about it didn't sit right. I hadn't touched alcohol in nearly a decade. A heart attack at 60 forced me to quit, and I never looked back. Doctors told me another brush with liquor could be playing with fire. I remembered that as I held the bottle, the weight of it heavy and cold. I could practically hear Daniel's voice in my head, mocking me, daring me to try it. I placed the bottle on the counter and stepped back. It didn't belong in my house. I thought about tossing it straight into the trash. But something in me resisted. Throwing it away felt too much like surrender. Too much like telling Daniel that even his attempt, whatever it was, had power over me. The following week, Daniel's wife Claire invited me to a small family dinner at her parents' home. It wasn't unusual despite the rift with my son. Claire had always been polite, even kind, whenever we saw each other. Her father, Robert Hayes, a man in his early 70s with a warm laugh and a handshake like a steel clamp, had once told me he respected the way I'd worked my whole life in the oil fields. As I stood in my kitchen staring at the tequila, an idea came to me. I'd bring it to the Hayes family gathering as a gesture of goodwill. Let it be their celebration drink, a peace offering of sorts. Maybe it would smooth the jagged edges between us. On the evening of the dinner, I tucked the bottle into a gift bag and drove across town. The Hayes house stood proudly at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, its porch lights glowing in the warm dusk. When I walked in, Claire hugged me, Robert clapped me on the back, and for a moment, I forgot about the silence with Daniel. Later, when we were all seated around the table, I pulled out the bottle. "I don't drink anymore," I explained, setting it down in front of Robert. "But this came to me as a birthday present. I thought it deserved to be opened among friends." Robert's eyes lit up. "Now that's a bottle worth celebrating," he said, grinning as he lifted it up to admire the label. He promised we'd all share it after dinner. I smiled, but inside something twisted in my chest. I told myself I was doing the right thing, passing it along. Still, a voice deep inside whispered that I had just set something in motion I could never take back. Dinner at the Hayes house that evening felt like stepping into a different world. Robert carved the roast with steady hands. Claire filled plates with mashed potatoes and green beans, and conversation rolled easily across the table. For a little while, I allowed myself to sink into the warmth of it, the way families are supposed to gather without suspicion, without walls. But the bottle sat in the center like a guest of its own, waiting. Its glass reflected the light from the chandelier above, catching my eyes every few minutes, no matter how I tried to ignore it. When dessert was finished, Robert clapped his hands together. "All right," he said, rising from his chair. "Time to open this beauty." He cut the seal, twisted the cork free, and poured amber liquid into heavy glasses. The smell was strong, sharp, familiar in a way that tugged at old memories of oilfield nights, when a shot of liquor dulled the aches of 12 hours in steel boots. He lifted his glass. "To good company," he said. Everyone echoed him, glasses raised. I only touched my rim to theirs, the way I always did, pretending to sip. But Robert downed his half-glass in a single swallow, smacking his lips and chuckling. "Smooth," he said. "Dangerously smooth." Claire's mother sipped carefully. Robert poured another. By the time we were clearing the table, his cheeks glowed red, his laugh booming louder. He poured a third glass, joking about how this was the best birthday gift he'd ever received, and it wasn't even his birthday. I forced a smile, though my chest tightened. Something about his eagerness unsettled me, but I pushed it aside. An hour later, as the evening wound down, Robert leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. "Must be the sugar," he muttered, pushing his plate away. He tried to stand but staggered, gripping the edge of the table. Claire shot to her feet. "Dad, are you all right?" Robert's voice cut off. His face went pale. His body slumped sideways. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the hardwood floor. The room exploded into chaos. Claire screamed. Her mother rushed to his side, and I fumbled for my phone with trembling hands. My fingers barely found the numbers as I shouted to the dispatcher. 72-year-old male. Collapsed. Possible cardiac arrest. "We need an ambulance now." Paramedics arrived within minutes, carrying bags, speaking in clipped, urgent voices. They worked over Robert in the living room while we stood frozen at the edges. The monitors beeped, their needles flashing. At last, they lifted him onto a stretcher, mask strapped to his face, and rolled him out the door. Claire's mother sobbed against her daughter's shoulder. I stood rooted, my ears roaring like a storm, staring at the broken shards of glass glistening on the floor. It wasn't until I got home that the dread truly sank in. The bottle had stayed at the Hayes house, but in the pit of my stomach a thought gnawed. What if the tequila wasn't just tequila? I tried to push it away as paranoia, but memories surfaced, like oil rising through water. The odd, chemical sharpness ID smelled when first uncorking the package. The missing little plastic vial I thought I'd seen in my trash bin days earlier. The anonymous card, Daniel's unmistakable handwriting. I sat in my kitchen long after midnight, staring at the empty space on my counter where the bottle had once rested. I couldn't shake the feeling that the gift wasn't meant for Robert at all. It was meant for me. And by passing it on, I had unwittingly redirected the danger. The guilt clawed at me. Robert lay in a hospital bed fighting for his life because I had chosen not to throw that bottle away. My son's gift had nearly killed his own father-in-law. Sleep never came that night. Instead, I began scribbling down everything: times, dates, details, even the smell of the liquor into a spiral notebook. I didn't know why. Only that instinct told me I might need a record. At dawn, I stood at the window as the sun bled orange over Houston's skyline. A voice inside me whispered the words I had been trying not to say out loud. Daniel tried to kill me. The next morning, I drove straight to the hospital. Claire met me in the waiting room, her face pale, her hands clenched around a styrofoam cup of cold coffee. "They said it was his heart," she whispered. "But Dad's never had heart problems. Not once." I swallowed hard. I wanted to tell her everything: the card, the bottle, the suspicion clawing inside me, but the words caught in my throat. How could I accuse my own son? And what if I was wrong? Still, when I stepped into Robert's room and saw him lying there, machines beeping steadily beside him, the guilt pressed heavier. His skin looked gray, his breath shallow. If I had just thrown that bottle away, he would never have lifted it to his lips. When the doctor mentioned possible toxin exposure, something inside me snapped into focus. I knew I couldn't stay silent. Back home, I dug through my cabinets until I found it. A small mason jar. 2 nights earlier, before wrapping the bottle as a gift, I'd poured a little into the jar. It was an old habit from my years working inspections. I liked to keep samples of anything unusual. That habit, strange as it was, might have just saved me. I tucked the jar into a cooler and drove to the outskirts of town where my old friend Henry Castillo ran a private lab. We had served together back in the army, and had gone on to become a toxicologist. He raised an eyebrow when I walked in holding the cooler. "You look like hell, Richard," he said. "What's in the box?" "Tequila," I answered, my voice hoarse. "But I think there's something else in it." Henry didn't ask more questions. He took the jar into the lab, promising results by evening. The hours dragged like years. I paced my kitchen, replaying the night in my head, the pop of the cork, Robert's laugh, the thud of his body hitting the floor. My stomach churned with every memory. By the time Henry called, the sun had dipped low, painting the sky orange. "You were right," he said grimly. "This isn't just tequila. Someone laced it with an extract from oleander. Highly toxic. A small amount can trigger arrhythmias and cardiac arrest, especially in older patients with even mild health issues." My knees nearly gave out beneath me. Oleander. I'd seen those plants growing along Texas highways, beautiful but deadly. People knew not to let pets chew the leaves, but someone had gone to the trouble of distilling it and mixing it into a bottle meant for me. "Henry," I whispered. "How sure are you?" 100%, he replied. "The concentrations match intentional preparation. This wasn't contamination. This was deliberate." Deliberate. The word echoed in my skull like a hammer. I hung up the phone and sat in silence. For the first time, I let myself fully accept the thought. Daniel had sent that bottle, not as a peace offering, but as a weapon. He had tried to kill me. And because I passed the gift along, his own father-in-law was nearly the victim. I opened my notebook and began writing everything down. The date the package arrived, the exact wording of the note, the time Robert collapsed, the doctor's comments. I drew arrows, timelines, bullet points. It looked less like a diary and more like a case file. My instincts as an inspector had returned. Every detail mattered. That night, as I prepared for bed, I walked past the back door and froze. The lock looked scratched, faint but fresh. I crouched down, ran my finger along the groove. Someone had tried to slip inside. My chest tightened. Whoever had poisoned that bottle might have come back for the sample. I quickly checked the cooler where I'd stored the mason jar. It was gone. Only an empty space remained. I sank onto a chair, my hands shaking. Someone had been inside my home, searching for evidence. And the only person who would have wanted that jar gone was the same one whose handwriting had been on the card. My son, Daniel. The truth pressed down so hard I could barely breathe. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was war. The next morning, I drove straight to the Houston Police Department with my notebook clutched under my arm. I asked to see Detective Alvarez, a man I'd once met at a community safety seminar years ago. When he entered the small interview room, I barely recognized him older now. His hair streaked with gray, but his eyes sharp as ever. "What's this about, Mr. Lawson?" he asked, setting down his coffee. I laid the notebook on the table and pushed it toward him. "It's about my son," I said quietly, "and a bottle of tequila that nearly killed his father-in-law." For over an hour, I told him everything: the package, the handwriting, the collapse at Robert's dinner table, Henry's toxicology results, and finally the missing mason jar from my cooler. Alvarez didn't interrupt much, just scribbled notes and studied me with the kind of steady gaze that made you feel both exposed and protected. When I finished, he leaned back, If what you're saying is accurate, this is attempted murder. But we'll need more than your suspicions to build a case. I nodded. I've been writing down every detail, every call, every sound at night. Someone was in my house. Detective. I can prove it. He tapped the notebook. Keep doing that. And don't confront your son directly. If he's capable of lacing liquor with oleander, we can't risk him slipping away before we gather evidence. As I left the precinct, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Did you enjoy your gift? A low voice said. Before I could respond, the line went dead. The sound of it chilled me, not because I didn't recognize it, but because I did. That night, I set small traps around my house the way I used to, when inspecting rigs for tampering. A hair across the edge of a door. A thread tied loosely between two cabinet handles. A voice recorder hidden in my jacket pocket, hanging by the door. I wasn't sure what I'd catch, but I needed proof. Just after midnight, the phone rang again. This time a whisper. Next time, don't share. Click. Silence. I couldn't sleep after that. I sat in my chair, listening to every creak of the house. My notebook open on my lap. The betrayal burned, but underneath it was something colder. Resolve. The following afternoon, when I stepped outside to get the mail, I saw Claire standing nervously at the edge of my driveway. She wore sunglasses, though it wasn't bright, and her hands shook as she clutched her purse. Claire? I asked, startled. What are you doing here? She glanced around before hurrying closer. Please don't tell Daniel I came, she whispered. I had to talk to you. We went inside. She perched on the edge of the sofa, her shoulders rigid. I know something's wrong. I found things in the garage jars. Plants. Notes. He's been experimenting for months. He said it was for research, for natural medicine. But I looked at his laptop, her voice cracked. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse and handed it to me. It was a printout of search results. Oleander. Dosage, elderly, cardiac. Plant extract lethal dose. Masking toxins and alcohol. My stomach dropped. Claire wiped her eyes. And there's more. He wrote initials in a notebook. Rach. R.L. I didn't know what it meant until last week. H. Robert Hayes. R.L.U. He's been talking about debts. About how you ruined his future. He said once you were gone, everything would be easier. I sat back, the weight of her words pressing into me like stones. My son hadn't just thought about this. He had planned it, measured it. Claire, I said softly, you did the right thing coming here. But you have to give this to the police. It can't just be me saying it. She nodded, tears slipping beneath her sunglasses. I don't want him to hurt anyone else. Not you. Not my dad. As she left, I felt a strange mix of grief and grim determination. My son's wife had just confirmed what I had feared most. Daniel wasn't acting out of anger in the moment. He was executing a plan. And plans like that don't stop until someone stops them. Detective Alvarez didn't waste time. The next morning he called me into his office. Claire already sitting there with red-rimmed eyes and a folder in her hands. She had done it, turned over the laptop screenshots. The printouts. Even a thumb drive shed copied when Daniel wasn't looking. Alvarez's face was unreadable as he flipped through the evidence. This is enough to request a warrant, he said at last. If we find what we expect in his house, it won't just be suspicion anymore. It'll be proof. I felt both relief and dread. Proof meant safety. Proof also meant my son's life as I knew it was over. That evening, unmarked police cars lined quietly along Daniel's street. I sat in one of them beside Alvarez, my hands clenched on my knees, as officers entered the house with the signed warrant. From the outside, the place looked ordinary. 2 stories of brick, a trimmed lawn, Claire's car in the driveway. But inside, the officers moved quickly, opening cabinets, pulling boxes from shelves. Minutes stretched into an hour. Then a call crackled over Alvarez radio. "Detective, you'd better see this." We went to the garage. There, beneath a tarp, stood a workbench, cluttered with mason jars and bottles, each labeled with neat handwriting. Some labels read, "Lavender tincture, mint extract," but others chilled me. "Oleander concentrate, foxglove trial." Beside them sat a small distillation kit, tubes coiled like snakes, and several glass vials half filled with cloudy liquid. One officer opened a leather-bound notebook they'd found on the bench. Alvarez read aloud, "Roach, trial dose. Result, unstable. Nausea. Collapse. RL, full dose. Lethal. Confirm next batch." The letters blurred in my vision. Rach. Robert Hayes. RL. Richard Lawson. I stumbled back, my hand gripping the doorway. He had written it down, my name reduced to initials in a column of targets. The officer flipped further. Dozens of pages. All neat. All methodical. Measurements. Ratios. Notes on concealment. My son had kept a record like a scientist perfecting an experiment. Alvarez's jaw tightened. This is more than enough. But when we searched the rest of the house, Daniel was nowhere to be found. His closet was half empty. A suitcase gone. The bed stripped bare. Head left before we arrived. Alvarez cursed under his breath. Someone tipped him off. My chest ached. "Claire." She shook her head quickly. "No." I didn't say anything. He must have noticed the files were missing. For the first time, fear outweighed anger. Daniel was out there, knowing the police had his secrets, knowing I had turned against him, and a man desperate enough to poison his own father didn't have much left to lose. That night, I returned home under police escort. They checked the locks, placed a patrol car nearby. Still, the silence inside my house felt heavier than ever. Every creak in the floorboards made me flinch. I kept imagining Daniel's shadow in the hallway. His eyes the same shade I'd seen when he was a boy, only now twisted with hate. I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open, staring at the word lethal, copied from his journal. How had we come to this? I remembered Daniel at 12, proudly handing me a birdhouse head built in shop class. I remembered him at 18, strutting in his cap and gown, promising he'd make me proud. And now I had just watched officers carry out evidence that he'd planned to end me. Near midnight, the phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail. Later, Alvarez played it back. Daniel's voice, low and flat. "You think paper and jars will save you? You're wrong. This isn't finished." I sat there in the dim glow of the desk lamp, my pen hovering over the page. For the first time, I realized this wouldn't end with jars and notebooks. My son was still out there, and until he was caught, none of us were safe. The days that followed were a blur of tension. A patrol car idled near my house around the clock, but it didn't make me feel safer. If anything, the flashing lights on the curb reminded me that my own son was being hunted like a criminal. 3 nights after the raid, my phone rang again. This time, I answered before it could go to voicemail. "You ruined everything," Daniel's voice growled. "We could have settled this without them." "Daniel," I said, my throat dry. "You nearly killed Robert. You tried to kill me." Silence. Then a laugh, hollow and sharp. "You think you're the victim? You stole years from me. You hoarded money, opportunities. This was justice." The line went dead. I sat there in the dark, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. My son wasn't just dangerous. He was convinced he was righteous. The next morning, I found a note slipped beneath my door, written in the same sharp handwriting I'd recognized on the birthday card. "Stop letting them in, or I will." No signature. No need for one. Detective Alvarez collected the note. his jaw tightening as he sealed it in a bag. He's escalating. That means he's desperate. Desperate men make mistakes. That afternoon, Alvarez returned with news. We traced some of the plants from his garage to a wholesale supplier. Turns out Daniel didn't grow them himself. He got them from someone who knows exactly what they are. He laid down a photo. A young man. Stocky build. Wearing a landscaping company polo. Mark Lawson. Your nephew. Your late brother's kid. The air left my lungs. Mark had been close to Daniel since childhood. They'd spent summers fishing together, working odd jobs for pocket money. I hadn't seen much of Mark in years, but I remembered his quiet, watchful eyes. Mark's company specializes in ornamental plants. Alvarez continued. Oleander, foxglove, all of it. He supplied the raw materials. We think Daniel convinced him it was for some alternative medicine project. But the dosage notes in that notebook, those came from Daniel. So Daniel hadn't been alone. He had drawn family into his plan, twisting loyalty into complicity. That night, Claire returned to my house under police escort. Her hands shook as she set down a flash drive. I found this in a drawer. Daniel must have forgotten, she whispered. It has messages between him and Mark. Daniel was the one pushing for lethal formulas. Mark seemed scared but went along. You need this. Alvarez's team combed through the files, uncovering encrypted emails where Daniel referred to me as the old man and Robert as the decoy. The instructions were chillingly specific. First, trial. Half dose. Final full measure in sealed bottle. Reading those words, I felt the ground tilt beneath me. My own son had reduced me to an equation in his sick plan. The following week, police tracked Daniel's car to a motel outside Galveston. By the time they arrived, the room was empty, sheets stripped, but a burner phone lay on the nightstand. On it were 2 unsent messages. One read, "Hell regret choosing them over me." The other, "If he won't give me my life back, I'll take his." When Alvarez showed me the screen, I felt the last remnants of hope drain away. The boy I'd raised, the man I once prayed would change, was gone. In his place stood a stranger who believed I was his enemy. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the window watching the patrol cars' headlights sweep across the street. I thought of Daniel as a child, running through sprinklers, laughing with water dripping from his chin. I thought of the moment he stormed out 4 years ago, eyes burning with hatred. Now those same eyes were out there in the dark, watching, waiting. And I realized something chilling. This wouldn't end with him being found. It wouldn't end with a warrant. This would end only in a courtroom or in blood. 6 months later, the Harris County Courthouse buzzed with tension. Reporters lined the steps, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. Former inspector's son charged with attempted murder. The headlines screamed. It sounded surreal, like a crime show on late-night television. But it wasn't TV. It was my life. Daniel had finally been arrested after a traffic stop in Louisiana. Had been living under a false name, driving a stolen truck, carrying 3 burner phones and a notebook filled with addresses including mine. When U.S. Marshals brought him back in chains. I saw his face on the news. He didn't look like the boy I'd raised. He looked hollow, wild, a stranger with my blood. The trial opened with the state presenting its case. The poisoned tequila, Robert Hayes, medical records, the toxicology from Henry's lab, the seized notebook with initials RH and RL. Each piece stacked higher, a mountain of evidence. I sat in the front row, Claire behind me, her hand clutching her mother's. Robert, still frail but alive, took the stand first. His voice shook as he described the moment he collapsed. The pain, the terror of seeing paramedics above him. Then Henry testified about the oleander extract. This was no accident, he told the jury. It was prepared, measured, and administered with intent. When it was my turn, I walked to the witness stand on legs that felt too heavy. I raised my hand, swore the oath, and met the eyes of 12 strangers who would decide whether my son would spend decades behind bars. I told them about the package, the card, the handwriting I knew as well as my own. I told them how I passed the bottle to Robert, how Id found the lock scratched, the jar missing, how the calls came at night, low voices whispering threats. The defense attorney rose slowly, adjusting his glasses. Mr. Wanser. Lawson, isn't it true that you and your son have been estranged for years? That you've had financial disputes? Yes, I admitted. So isn't it possible, he pressed, that your bitterness has clouded your judgment? That you want to believe Daniel meant harm, when in fact this was a tragic accident? No, I said firmly, because I've seen his words, his notes, my initials, his father-in-law's initials. He wrote lethal. That's not an accident. That's intent. The lawyer tried again, producing a so-called handwriting analysis, claiming the notebook entries didn't match Daniel's penmanship. But the prosecution countered with digital evidence from Daniel's laptop, files, saved drafts, even a search history that included oleander lethal dose, elderly male. The air in the courtroom felt electric. Finally, Daniel himself took the stand, dressed in a wrinkled suit, his wrists still marked from shackles. He looked out at the jury with a practiced calm. My father has always tried to control me, he said smoothly. He cut me off financially, turned my wife against me. This is his revenge. I never poisoned anything. For a moment, some jurors shifted uneasily. His voice had the ring of conviction. But then the prosecutor asked him to explain the initials in the notebook. His mask cracked. They could be anything, he said too quickly. Random letters. Experiments. You can't prove they mean Robert or Richard. The prosecutor held up the printouts from Claire's flash drive. Emails, where Daniel referred to me as the old man, and Robert as the decoy. His words in black and white. Silence fell heavy in the room. When closing arguments ended, I glanced at Daniel one last time. His eyes locked on mine, burning with something darker than anger. His lips moved soundlessly, but I could read them as clearly as if head shouted, "This isn't over." The jury filed out. Hours passed. My heart hammered with every tick of the clock. Finally, they returned. The foreman stood, paper trembling in his hand. The jury, find the defendant, Daniel Lawson, guilty of attempted murder. A collective gasp swept the courtroom. Claire burst into tears. Robert gripped his wife's hand. I closed my eyes, my breath shuddering out. But Daniel only smiled small, cold as the bailiffs led him away. The jury's word guilty echoed in my ears long after the foreman sat down. The judge thanked them for their service and dismissed them for deliberating on sentencing the next morning. I left the courtroom feeling like my legs were made of sandbags. Justice had been spoken, but it didn't feel like triumph. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying Daniel's last look at me, that thin smile, those words mouthed like a curse. This isn't over. Even in chains, even convicted, my son still found a way to twist the knife. The next day, the courtroom filled again. Claire sat between her parents, her eyes red from crying. Robert looked tired but determined, his cane steady in his grip. I walked in with my jacket buttoned, carrying the weight of a father who'd come too far to falter now. The judge, an older woman with steel-gray hair, read through the case file with a tone that was both measured and merciless. The defendant, she said, has been found guilty of attempted murder with aggravating factors, premeditation, use of a toxic substance, and intent toward multiple victims. The words multiple victims made my chest seize. She was talking about Robert and me. The notebook had shown my initials next to a dosage that Henry confirmed would have stopped my heart for good. Mr. Detective now. Lawson, the judge said, turning toward my son. You had every opportunity to live a decent life. Instead, you chose betrayal, secrecy, and violence against those closest to you. This court sentences you to 30 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 20. The room was silent except for the scratching of pens and the muffled sob of a woman 2 benches behind me. Claire buried her face in her hands. Robert nodded slowly, lips pressed tight. Daniel? He didn't flinch. He just leaned back, smirk tugging at his lips, as if prison was nothing more than another house he'd been told to live in. The bailiffs cuffed him and pulled him to his feet. He turned his head at the last second, eyes locking on me again. No words this time, just a stare that promised memory as its own prison. One he intended me to live in long after his cell door clanged shut. When they let him out, the sound of the door closing behind him was louder than the gavel. Outside, the air was sharp and bright. Reporters crowded the steps, shouting questions, but I pushed past them. I wasn't there for sound bites. I was there to breathe. Claire found me on the sidewalk. Her voice cracked. Richard, I don't know how to thank you. You saved my father. I shook my head. I didn't save him. He saved himself by surviving. I just passed the bottle along. Her eyes brimmed with tears. No. You gave truth its chance. That matters. Robert lifted his cane and tapped it lightly against the pavement. You did what fathers are supposed to do. Richard. Protect. Even when it hurts. I looked at the two of them, standing side by side. A family that had almost been destroyed by the man I raised. My throat tightened. Protecting meant losing him. And I don't know if I'll ever stop grieving that. Robert put a hand on my shoulder. Maybe that's the price. But better grief than a gravestone. That night, I sat on my porch, the Texas wind carrying the smell of rain. I set a mug of coffee beside me and looked at the old oak tree at the edge of my yard. Its roots ran deep, twisting through the soil in ways no one could see. Strong enough to hold through storms, but dangerous if poisoned. Daniel's notebook had shown roots too, the drawing of a tree with circles around its base. He thought it was a message of power. But to me it was a warning. Even the strongest roots can rot if you pour poison at their base. I thought of the boy had once been. The son who used to beg me to toss a football in the yard. Somewhere along the years, between my work, his anger, and the empty spaces left by his mother's passing, something cracked. Poison filled the cracks. And by the time I saw it, it was too late. Still, Robert was alive. I was alive. And the truth had been dragged into daylight where it belonged. The lesson? Family blood ties are not enough to build trust. Trust is built with action, with love, with honesty. And once it's broken, once poison enters, you can't pretend it isn't there. You face it. Or it consumes you. I raised my mug to the darkening horizon and whispered, to survival, to truth, and to the roots that stay strong. Because in the end, justice isn't about revenge. It's about making sure the poison doesn't spread any further. They say betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from your own blood. I never imagined the gift my son sent me for my birthday would carry poison, meant to end my life. Passing that bottle to Robert saved me, but it nearly cost him everything. And yet, inside that trial, I learned something ill. Never forget. Love doesn't excuse destruction, and silence doesn't heal wounds. We can grieve the child we raised while still standing against the person they became. Family is more than blood, it's the people who show up, protect you, and tell you the truth, even when it hurts. Justice doesn't erase the scars, but it makes sure the poison stops spreading. So if you take one thing from my story, let it be this. Loyalty without honesty is a trap. Protect your roots, but never let them bind you to what seeks to destroy you.